Well, good afternoon and welcome to episode number 18 of Staff Chat. We are excited to be with you on this November afternoon. Doesn't it feel great outside, everybody? It's nice and cool. I hope the humidity has finally left us. We are excited, or I'm excited today because, one of the things I miss most about being with all of you in the office is the opportunity to just sit in the hallway or stand in the hallway sometimes and have those impromptu conversations. And a lot of times we'll still have our briefcase or our books or whatever we're carrying around with us, and it'll spark a conversation about what somebody's reading, and maybe we can learn what they're learning, or we can pick up that book and start reading it ourselves. So I thought today might be fun for us just to share what we've been reading. Have you read anything in the past few months that has spoken to you, or anything that you're reading now that you'd like for the group to know about? So who would like to go first?
I'll be glad to, Jeannie.
Thanks, Jim.
So I think everybody knows that we've had our grandchildren with us for the last 4 months. Actually, they'll be leaving this coming Saturday, so life will be different. But really the only thing that I've had any consistency in reading since they've been here has been the Hardy Boys. Every night I read a chapter of the Hardy Boys with my grandson. We're about to finish up The Clue of the Screeching Owl, which is number 41 in the series. And then right after that, he's picked out The Haunted Fort, which is number 44 in the series. So what I've learned from that is, and my grandson is 7, and he reads pretty well, but he still likes to be read to. And some of the vocabulary in the Hardy Boys is actually pretty advanced for a 7-year-old. So almost every page he will say, "Granddaddy, what's that word?" The word might be pistol, or hootenanny was the word last night. And so I get to give him a little vocabulary lesson about what these words mean. But what I love about that is his curiosity and his willingness to say, "I don't know that, and I want to learn something new." And I hope that I always keep that same willingness to say, I don't know that, but I'd like to learn a little bit more.
Jim, like you, there's a lot of children's literature at my house. So I've read a lot of Cowgirl Kate and Coco and Mr. Putter and Tabby and Flat Stanley and Rescue Princesses. And we do a lot of read aloud, but I guess we just finished as a family a World War II memoir called Sink or Swim that was about the youngest Navy person who entered the Navy at age 13. He lied about his age. And so it was based on a true story. So it was so fascinating. Anyway, it was a great children's book. But as far as adult books, I've recently finished The Lazy Genius Way. So one of my favorite podcasters is Kendra Adachi, and her buzz phrase is be genius about the things that matter and lazy about the things that don't. And so at this phase of my life, I just love that idea that choose what really matters about whatever it is. So about Thanksgiving, what is it that really matters to you? It's probably food and family and that sense of togetherness, and then let everything else go about what doesn't really matter. So think about how you can accomplish the things that feel important to you in each different sort of situation and season of life, and just in every sort of parenting moment. So I really love all of her systems and things that she suggests for families and parents. And then I've also been reading a lot of Faithful Families, who is by Tracy Smith. She has about 3 or 4 books for helping families integrate faith into just their everyday practice. And that was her particular new release on Christmas and Advent, which kind of shaped some of the things that are in our adventure kits this year. So.
Yeah, so I wanted to share what I'm reading simply because it's something that Gavin actually suggested, I think maybe in a previous staff chat. One of my friends actually gave me this book, Wilmington's Lie, and she said, "Stephen, you've got to read this. It's a really great book, and you live in Wilmington." And what's been really interesting for me about it is, y'all know I've only been here for about 5, maybe 6 years, and for me, reading Wilmington's Lie, it's not all of the Wilmington figures that's really made an impact. It's when I went to ECU, most of my friends stayed in ACOC dorm, or my brother was in the Koehn business school at UNC. And it's amazing how many of these names from this book actually were prominent figures throughout the entire state after the 1898 coup. So it's just really put a lot of North Carolina history in perspective for me. It's a really, it's a hard read. So, you gotta pretty much take it. I pretty much do, a chapter every other day, but I think it's a very necessary read.
I can go, I guess.
Yeah.
I've got 2 books that I've been trying to dabble in. And I try to remind myself that I do very much love to read, just making myself sit down to do so. It's easy to just find myself doing some other task, but I do love to read. And the one that I wanted to talk about first is called The Art of Commonplace by Wendell Berry. And I like this book just because it really challenges me to think about what I'm doing in regards to creation. Wendell Berry, if you've never heard of him before, is a Christian in Kentucky who pushes everybody's buttons. He pushes conservative people's buttons. He pushes buttons on liberal people and all across the board, challenging the way we are taking care of God's creation, good or bad. And I think it takes me back to Scripture. It takes me back to the way I view God's creation and the land and what it means to call something home. What does it mean to have commonplace, the art of the commonplace? It's just a bunch of essays, short essays where he talks about how we should be doing a better job or praising us for doing a good job in certain situations and things. So it's a really interesting challenge for me. Brought me back to days in divinity school when we talked about such things. The second is a lot lighter. I had a challenge from Haley to read all of the Harry Potter books. So I borrowed them from a good friend, Muriel Kimbrough, down the street to try and read them. And our whatever you want to call it, challenge was we read a book, watch a movie, read a book, watch a movie. I just finished book 4 and we're going to eventually watch the movie at some point. And I think they're fun. Harry Potter's fun because you get a little sense of creativity. Yes, the whole mystic witchcraft thing, it's not really like that to me. I just find it as a good chance to be creative and goofy and read about a interesting little character who's trying to find his way in the world. So that has been what I've been reading recently. And I think I continue to search other avenues as well. I totally take recommendations.
Sorry about that. I have been a little slack on reading books lately, but I have been watching movies from other countries, especially India. I have been watching movies, of course, Korea and some Pakistan, some of these other places, but they're all those subtitle movies, and they're not the Bollywood. I have watched a few little Bollywood movies, but these are like they're almost always about set up marriages, where the parents have picked a husband or wife for their kid, and then the troubles that go through that. And so that I've really done that more than reading. The latest book I read, though, is this book by Andy Stanley called Irresistible. And it is so good in the fact that he just boils Christianity down to love one another. And we all know that. But he just makes a 300-page book about it. And he just talks about how the Old Testament, a lot of people, that it's really the Jewish record rather than the Christian record, and that Jesus told us to love one another. And so it's always made a big impact in my life. And so I just tried to read that. It's been real good.
And thinking about this, I realized how little reading for pleasure I do. And so it has kind of challenged me to go find something to read just for the love of reading. Because it's usually reading so I'm in a couple studies right now, and I'm reading the book of Isaiah and about Beatitudes. But I picked up recently, again, Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger. Because as I try to, get ready to think past COVID, past whatever, how is the world going to be different, and what's it going to be like leading in the years to come? And, I love this book because it just is what do you do when you go off the map? And there's just so much right now that feels off the map, things that felt so natural to me in terms of spiritual formation and education and teaching, and all of that just seems different, and different doesn't have to be bad, but just figuring out how do you reorient and retool to be effective in a world that you really don't know exactly what it's going to look like. So anyway, that's what I'm reading right now. And I'd show it to you, but it's on my phone.
So I've been reading a book entitled Forged in Crisis. It's written by a lady named Nancy Koehn. And I like to tell stories. I like to hear stories. I like to read stories. And this is essentially the stories of 5 people that were leaders in their own way. One is a guy named Ernest Shackleton, and he took a crew from England and traveled down to Antarctica. They were going to try to make their way to the South Pole, and their ship gets caught in amongst the icebergs and whatnot and sinks. And there he is with a crew of 28, and they are hundreds of miles from nowhere. And it's his responsibility to try to get those guys safely home. So he's one of the people that they highlight. Another one is Abraham Lincoln. And Lincoln's life is certainly an interesting one. On the other side of the Abraham Lincoln story is Frederick Douglass. And so they spotlight him. And then Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And then finally, a lady by the name of Rachel Carson. Rachel was dying of cancer, and at the same time doing autopsy research that pertain to saving our earth. And so as I read that book, all these folks, it tells some of their the background that led up to the situation they're in, but then the thing that they kind of become famous for, though Rachel Carson I'd never heard of, nor had I heard of Ernest. And it's interesting that those two are the bookends to the book. Wonderful book, and I would commend it to you. At the same time, like Jayne, I'm reading the Canoeing the Mountains. I had started reading that near the end of my sabbatical when I was out in the Northwest, and then put it down and picked it back up and started reading again a few weeks ago. And putting the 2 books together has been quite an interesting thing for me.
Well, I'm reading a new book, When the Center Does Not Hold, Leading in an Age of Polarization. It's by David Brubaker. Pretty timely book for right now in our polarized world and polarized communities. And it's about leadership. And it's all about how to react or not react in times of polarization as a leader, and that words really count and they're important, and what a leader does in those type of situations are important. And it uses information and stuff from all sorts of sources, from conflict resolution to media stuff to, just a pretty broad amount of information. It has a little acronym in the introduction that I've found to be very helpful. And it says that what we need is hope. And that's an acronym. Hope, humanize our opponents. Openly state our core beliefs. P, pursue justice. And E, engage difference. And, usually we either want to villainize everybody and don't talk, or we just want to just ignore everything. And that's usually a wrong thing to do as well. And so hopefully at the end of this, I'll be personally a better leader in our time of polarization, and try to be a non-anxious presence, both in my personal life and in the life of our church.
Guess I'll go next. It's kind of an ongoing joke with some of the people that I read books with that I prefer to read old dead guys, but I'm actually kind of breaking that mold right now and reading a book by a guy named James K.A. Smith. It's entitled Desiring the Kingdom. And it's kind of difficult to describe, but he's basically trying to offer a counter to traditional worldview. We use that word a lot as Christians, I think. Oh, well, we have a Christian worldview and there's a secular worldview and all these other different worldviews. But really, he's suggesting that implies that we are at our core thinking creatures, when really thinking is kind of a subset of what we are in his mind, which is we are desiring creatures. And so kind of at our core, we desire things. And so his argument really is that is more what shapes us than, say, a thought-filled worldview. And so it's called Desiring the Kingdom because his whole philosophy is that we go through Basically, you can kind of picture it mentally. We go through and participate in things that he calls liturgies, which are basically rituals that become practice, or practices that become rituals that then become liturgies that we walk through, whether it's going to the mall, going to Chick-fil-A, going to church, whatever it may be. Those become liturgies. Those liturgies then influence us and create habits, and habits are different from practices. Habits are what cause us to move forward into practices. And these practices aim at our version of the kingdom. Another way to think of the kingdom that he describes in the book is your version of the good life. So as Christians, we are to desire the kingdom of Christ. And so he also kind of dives into what that kingdom in particular looks like, as opposed to some other kingdoms. And of course, it's all cyclical because, you know, as our desires form and we shape our desires to follow the kingdom of God, then of course we then incorporate new liturgies that form new habits, that form new practices toward that end. So that's kind of the crux of the book. It's much deeper than that, but that's kind of what it's based off of.
Those sound like great books, y'all. Gavin, I too struggle sometimes. It's like I do like to read, but I just don't make as much time as I should to read. Recently, I've gotten into audiobooks. And so I just finished, I had started it in preparation for the Beatitudes series, and it's called Words from the Hill. It's by Stu Gerard. Stu Gerard is a singer-songwriter from the UK. I think he's currently traveling with Michael W. Smith. But this book was so good about just really breaking down the Sermon on the Mount and just taking it piece by piece. And, you know, he told stories of grace from a woman's words who is on death row. And then, you know, he told a story about peace and peacekeeping or peacemaking from the perspective of an Israeli and Palestinian conflict, and from two people from that, you know, just sort of this bigger concept of some of these things that, you know, is so easy for me to get just in my narrow mind of what I think grace means to me, you know, but just to have this broader perspective. And so that's what I liked about the book. I think I shared with you guys a couple of weeks ago, you know, he's the one that I had really broke down the whole concept between peacekeeping and peacemaking, you know, and I feel like I've spent a lot of my adult life trying to be a peacekeeper and sometimes being silent when maybe God is really calling me to be a peacemaker and speak into conflict sometimes, to bring his kind of peace into a situation. And so he was the one that coined that sort of phrase and concept in my thinking recently. For fun, I have been reading just a little bit at night. I've been reading Jenna Bush Hager's book. Oh gosh, I just lost the name of it. Everything Beautiful in Its Time. It's just sort of a memoir of her and her grandparents and her mother and just special relationships in her life. And I've been able to reflect on some of those with my grandmother too. And so that's been a really fun thing to read. Well, I appreciate that. Well, I'll compile a list of all these books. I'll put them down in the comments below of this YouTube playlist. And if you are interested in talking to any of us any more about what we're reading, please don't hesitate to reach out. We would love to share with you how God is speaking to us through what we're reading. And we'd love to hear some good recommendations from you if you're watching this. All right, everybody, say bye. See ya.